What's up, everyone? Welcome to Fantasy Football today on this Monday afternoon here on CBS Sports Network. Adam Azer, Heath Cummings, and Dan Schneier. We are 10 days away from the start of the season. Heath has his Scott Fishbowl shirt on. Dan has his FFT Open shirt on. Nobody told me, so I have a plain black t-shirt on, but we are ready to get things started here, and I'm going to kick off the show. Heath loves this. I'm going to give you an impromptu, you are not prepared for it question. Here we go. You ready?
Yeah.
Heath, then Dan, give me your Super Bowl prediction.
Well, that is a difficult question to answer. I will go with Chiefs over Lions.
Okay. I'm going to take it a step further here. Let's get interesting here. Chiefs, I love this year. They're my team to win the Super Bowl. The NFC gets a little more interesting, and that's not a bold take or anything. The NFC gets a little more interesting. Let me go with Chiefs versus Packers in the Super Bowl. Chiefs win.
I'm going to do even better in the ratings. I'm going to go with Jets, Packers, Aaron Rodgers. Oh, we are pumped up for that. All right, let's get to our big fantasy topics right now to kick off the show. Our four big topics. We got good news yesterday on Ja'Marr Chase, but not yet on Lamb and Aiyuk. And Chase practiced yesterday for the first time with his teammates in training camp. So the first topic here, we'll go to Heath first. And Dan, you can follow. What are we doing with the holdout wide receivers? Ja'Marr Chase, whose current ADP is 10th overall on CBS. CeeDee Lamb, whose current ADP is 5th overall. And Brandon Aiyuk, 45th overall right now. Heath, what are we doing with these three guys?
So I had moved Chase down to the 9th pick. I've moved him back up since he returned to practice to the 7th pick. I'm right back where I was with him, and he'll go up another spot higher if CeeDee Lamb doesn't report in the next couple of days. He's currently at pick 5 for me. I'd take the top 3 running backs and Tyreek Hill over him, and I might drop Lamb just a little bit more later this week. Aiyuk is probably the one I'm most worried about because it's a holdout situation. And then it's he might get traded to the Steelers or the Commanders, which I think would both be negatives for his value. He is outside of the first 3 rounds of fantasy drafts for me. He is outside of my top 20 wide receivers. Wide receiver 21 in round 4.
All 3 remained unmoved for me the entire offseason, Adam, just because they all had rapport and chemistry already with their quarterbacks. Ja'Marr Chase, that one goes without speaking. They threw 1,000 balls before they even came to the NFL together that summer, and that chemistry came over right away in year 1. I see it returning. Same thing with Lamb and Dak, and then finally Aiyuk and Purdy. So for me, it's not the type of holdout situation that I would worry about, especially because today's NFL, you just really can't afford to take a year off and sit it.
All right, topic number 2. We've got a couple of injured running backs who are pretty close to the top of draft boards, including the number 1 overall pick, Christian McCaffrey, and Jahmyr Gibbs as well. We did get some good news on Jahmyr Gibbs. It looks like he's making progress, has a chance to play in week 1. And Jaylen Warren's not really a part of this discussion for now, but he is hoping to play in week 1. If we focus on McCaffrey and Jahmyr Gibbs, Dan, I'll go to you first. What do you think about them? Is McCaffrey still 1.1? Is Gibbs a first-round pick for you?
McCaffrey remains 1.1 for me. If you look at just what he's been able to do, it's a cheat code. He was a cheat code in fantasy last year. No running back came close. We think this year Breece Hall and Bijan might be able to compete with him for that. But if he's healthy, I think it will remain the same. So he remains the 1-1 for me. Gibbs was never a first-round pick for me. He was one of those ADPs I never really understood. Just too high for somebody who's not has full, sharing a backfield. Montgomery had 13 touchdowns and over 1,000 yards last year. I don't think they're going to want to take that out of the offense. But Gibbs will be kind of more of a mid-2 for me, mid-round 2 pick.
I've also not moved Christian McCaffrey, but I think he's the easiest pick on the board for who do we get to October or November, and we just all feel dumb because there's a 28-year-old running back with his career workload who was battling an injury in camp, and we just didn't care at all. But I don't care at all. He's my 101. I took him 101 in a draft this weekend. Gibbs, I agree with Dan. You made this good point all summer long, Adams. For Jahmyr Gibbs to be worth a first-round pick, he had to see an increase in workload. What he was in the second half of last year was not a top 5 fantasy running back, was not worth a first-round pick. Now, the Lions told us this offseason, we're going to give Jahmyr Gibbs a bigger workload. Then he was hurt for most of the summer with an undisclosed soft tissue injury, and then he suffered a hamstring injury during training camp. And so I just don't really believe that we're going to see a big boost in his total touches per game, not when you have David Montgomery. He's a round 2 pick for me.
Do you guys even want the 101 pick this year? McCaffrey was about, I think, 3.5 points better than any running back last year in PPR. Kyron Williams was number 2. I think he was maybe about 2 points better than any wide receiver. I could be a little off on those numbers, but he was obviously the best player. But, it's almost like you feel obligated to take McCaffrey there. Heath, do you want 101 this year?
I still like 101 better than 2, 3, or 4 because the upside's so much bigger with McCaffrey, and because really like where round 2 players end is like halfway through the round. I think I prefer 7, 8, maybe even 9 more than I do 1, 2, 3, 4 this year. But if I have a choice in the top 4 picks, I'll still take 1.
Yeah, I'm with Heath on this one. You don't lose too much on the comeback in round 2, and I think McCaffrey gives you much higher upside.
All right, so I was thinking about this because in a lot of our drafts, I'm seeing the tight ends and the quarterbacks being drafted off the board, the first ones off the board, the first tier in sort of the same range. And then you've got this group of quarterbacks, Joe Burrow, C.J. Stroud, Anthony Richardson, and they go in similar ranges to guys like George Kittle and Kyle Pitts and Evan Ingram. So, Dan, which position do you typically draft first, quarterback or tight end? It doesn't have to be the guys I mentioned, but just curious, normal draft for you, do you typically dip into the quarterback pool? Or a little too cold in that pool. I'm going to go over to the hot tub, the tight end hot tub. Which are you dipping into first?
I'd say 90 to 95% of the time it's the tight end pool. This year for me, I really want to get one of McBride, Kincaid, Pitts, or potentially Mark Andrews if he falls. And sometimes he has fallen further than I expected. And I think I see a drop off there. I don't mind Ingram as well if I want to throw him in that mix as well. Kittle, not as high on with Aiyuk likely coming back there. And Laporte and Kelsey, I don't typically get. They're a little too high for me. But it's rare that I'll take a quarterback over any of these players when I'm drafting.
Yeah, and for me, it just entirely depends on who I'm drafting with. When I'm drafting inside the fantasy analyst bubble, it's probably quarterback that I take earlier because we see Patrick Mahomes or Jalen Hurts available at the end of round 3, early round 4, and I just can't resist that. If I'm drafting with normal people, as I did this weekend, most of those quarterbacks are gone by the time I'm picking in round 3, and so I'm taking Trey McBride or Mark Andrews.
Who are you calling not normal? Just kidding.
Did you just call us abnormal? Is that what just happened there?
That's the nice way to say it.
Yeah.
It's accurate. He's not the most accurate analyst in the business for nothing, folks. Last topic here. We're going to talk more about Heath's risers later and fallers, but which player, Heath, has risen the most for you in the preseason?
Well, I hope something doesn't happen in the next 5 minutes that changes this, but it's currently Rashee Rice, because the closer we get to the start of the season, the harder it gets to believe that he's going to face any sort of disciplinary action in 2024. He has been on the field all the time with Patrick Mahomes, and this is a guy who in his last 6 games after the Chiefs' bye last year, 25% target share. I actually think the additions of Marquise Brown and Xavier Worthy probably help Rice because they don't impact the short area targets that Rice is going to see, and they take the top off of the defense. We definitely saw that with Worthy in the preseason. We might see Rice keep that low ADOT, but the yak even go up this year, and I absolutely think he's scoring double-digit touchdowns. He's a pick in the first 3 rounds of drafts for me now. He was a round 7, round 8 pick at the beginning of the preseason.
It can't be Rice for me just because I was already taking him so high before all this because I kind of speculated this would happen where we wouldn't have the legal case play itself out for this year. And I really didn't understand why he was ranked so low to begin with. But it's actually his teammate for me. It's Xavier Worthy. Because, look, we never know with Andy Reid offense how these rookies are going to come in. Sky Moore, it took him time. Rashee Rice hit the ground running. Xavier Worthy, from what I've seen, this isn't going to be a thing that takes a lot of time. You can't not have this guy on the field. Some of these routes he's run in the preseason, you could see Andy Reid, I could see at least Andy Reid in his mind watching the tape and being like, wow, I can use this guy to unlock this area of my offense that we literally haven't had since Tyreek Hill. Because when he stops and starts, it is really difficult for a safety to declare and to be on the right path to contain him. And we've seen that happen throughout training camp practices, joint practices, and then obviously in the preseason. So it's Worthy for me.
I'll try to look up some ADP right now, right? So who's got the best value here? Rashee Rice. If he's really going 73rd, then that's him.
He's not.
Let's say Rashee Rice at the... Yeah. All right, forget it. It's Rashee Rice. Let's say you had to take him in the 5th round. Rashee Rice in the 5th round, Xavier Worthy in the 8th round, Marquise Brown in the 10th round. Heath, what's the best value there?
Well, Rice is 2 rounds behind where I have him ranked in the 5th round. And I basically have Xavier, like I took him in the 7th a little bit, but round 7, round 8 is where I think Worthy belongs. Round 9, round 10 is where Marquise Brown belongs. And I will just say, like, I think you're right about the Marquise Brown maybe being dropped too far. I also think it's possible that the Chiefs getting to see all this extra Xavier Worthy because Marquise Brown was on the shelf means that when Marquise Brown gets back to 100%, he just doesn't have the same role available to him that they thought he was going to have.
I want in on all of those players. I'll be honest with you, Adam. I'll say take Rice for this story, but I really think we could be looking at another. Like, look, Mahomes in 2020, just 1 year ago, went 5K plus with a crazy touchdown total. Like, I think that's coming back this year. I think he has even better weapons than he had in 2022.
Just give me Juju. I'll just,
Yeah.
Well, he's now going to mess with a lot of my builds because I have a lot of Worthy, a lot of Rice, and even some Brown, and I'm not excited about that addition.
Hopefully it's just depth. But up next on Fantasy Football Today, more risers from Heath, but also fallers. All right, we got to keep you honest here. Not everybody's a preseason riser. We'll take a look at how much Heath's rankings have changed throughout training camp. We'll be right back on Fantasy Football Today. Welcome back, everybody, to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. Adam, Heath, and Dan here. So we're going to take a look at risers and fallers throughout the preseason. What's changed in Heath's rankings? And Dan, we need you to spark some debate here. Don't be Mr. Nice Guy and agreeing all the time, okay? Like, get your debate hat on.
Okay.
All right? And, yeah, I mean...
You just agreed. What are you doing?
Yeah, good job. Nice work, yeah. All right, I'm going to take a shot at your hair after the hat joke, but I won't do it. Let's take a look at Heath's preseason risers. And it's been a good preseason for the rookie quarterbacks. Unfortunately, not J.J. McCarthy with the injury. But Daniels and Williams, we saw good stuff from May. He's not on this list, but that was last night. But Daniels and Williams and Heath, you talked about go for upside. So what's your message for people considering drafting Jayden Daniels and Caleb Williams?
Yeah, I mean, these are guys who I think you just kind of have to rank independent of what your projections might be. Because, if you go through the projections process and you look at what rookie passers have done in the NFL, it's often not fantastic, but they both can do enough with their legs. Williams has the weapons in DJ Moore and Rome Odunze and Keenan Allen. Daniels has shown the deep ball ability that we knew existed and might rush for 1,000 yards. So while I have these guys projected in the mid-teens at quarterback, I've actually pushed them both up into the top 12. One of the things that helped me make that decision was seeing names like Tua and Trevor Lawrence and on some sites Jared Goff available after round 10. You can go up and reach for Williams or Daniels, and I would actually prefer to pair them with Goff, start Goff the first 2 weeks of the season when he's at home, make sure the rookie is what you thought he was, and then hopefully have league-winning upside the rest of the year.
I want to make it clear that I am playing devil's advocate here. A lot of the risers that Heath has are people that I'm targeting, but there are some cases on the other side. The Caleb Williams side of it is, and this goes for Rome Odunze as well, who was on that list. I got to see the list again to get some of the other names back in my mind, but for those two, it's that, look, Shane Waldron, he's on my short list of coordinators that I'm not excited about and I'm not thrilled about. And he's had a really high run rate this preseason, and he's had a really high rate of putting 12 personnel on the field. Two things I don't want to see. They've been slow on offense. They haven't been at very high pace, playing at a very high pace in the preseason, and their defense is pretty good. So they might not be playing the shootout style football that we were expecting, and it could be frustrating for fantasy owners. Brian Thomas, Xavier Worthy, and Malik Nabers. I'm sorry, Brian Thomas and Xavier Worthy specifically. Brian Thomas, it looks great. He looks great, but he's still not running a full route tree, and Gabe Davis is still there. They also run a lot of 12 personnel. Same thing goes for Xavier Worthy. I'm very excited about him, but Marquise Brown could be back soon. Could Juju work into the mix? It's a playing time thing with all of these players. Javonte Williams is a player, if you want to look at the devil's advocate side. Look, he's looked okay, I think, in the preseason. I think his looking good has been a little overstated. Still doesn't look to me like the player I saw at UNC. But also, he's playing on a really bad offense with multiple backs who can play behind him, especially Jaleel McLaughlin. So those are the kind of cases against those players.
Yeah. And I will second the Javonte Williams one. I don't want to get too excited about him. Obviously, it's been a good preseason there were reports that he was going to get cut.
Right.
And he's clearly RB1. So no doubt he's been a riser. But I still put him in that big group of running backs that I'm not all that excited to draft, and I'd rather just wait for value. Like, I don't want to draft Aaron Jones at the top of that. Or Javonte Williams. I'd rather keep waiting and take Chase Brown, Zach Moss, Tajay Spears, whatever. Because Williams probably should catch some passes because it's Sean Payton's offense. At the same time, I think people in general with Denver have been way too impressed by what they've done against backups in the preseason, and they're going to really take their lumps with Bo Nix And like, I don't want to just repeat everything Dan said, but there are other guys who are going to play in that backfield, Heath.
And I don't want to criticize your very good attempt at playing devil's advocate. I mean, we do have an entire segment scheduled later in the show where Dan's going to disagree with me. I'm not sure that he needs to do it here. But this is not a value discussion. And if it was a value discussion, Javonte, his ADP is not going up that high. Like, he's still being drafted in round 7 or round 8 of draft. So it's not as if people have seen Javonte Williams as the RB1 for the Denver Broncos and said, let's push him up as high as Heath has him. You can still wait at the running back position and get Javonte Williams maybe a round earlier than the guys you were talking about, Adam. And the difference between him and them, of course, is that he's actually a starting running back on his own team. I'm not sure he's got everything back that he had at North Carolina. I am pretty sure he's going to touch the ball 15 to 20 times. And as much as I love Jaleel McLaughlin, that's not a guy that's taking a 1A job away from anybody. He is perfectly suited for the 1B role in Denver. And Javonte, as long as he stays healthy, will be the 1A.
It's more 30,000-foot view for me, but I do struggle with getting on board with any supposed 1A guys that are in bad offenses and don't necessarily catch a lot of passes. Javonte will catch passes. That's the plus for him. But when it comes to the Jahmyr Whites, the Ramondre Stevensons, the Aaron Joneses of the world, I'm looking at to what I think is bottom 5, bottom 6 scoring offenses in the NFL. So I'm really low on touchdown upside. And then potentially, if they lose any snaps at all, depending on game script or game flow, they become players that are unstartable for me. So they're just not investments that I will make.
And one thing we might revisit later in the show, I don't want to spoil anything, but I think Adam's done some really important research that indicates that you should be much more concerned about a wide receiver on a bottom 5 offense than a running back on a bottom 5 offense.
Not just bottom 5, but like bottom 10, basically. Yeah. It matters much more for wide receivers than it does for running backs. All right, let's take a look at the fallers list here. Heath's preseason fallers. Deshaun Watson, who didn't play this preseason game because of the arm. His arm was sore. Hopefully he should be playing week 1. We have some Steelers on this list. We have Wilson, Warren, and Freiermuth. Well, I won't read the whole list. Why don't you start, though, with the Steelers? Oh, and Pickens, too. Yeah, these are just guys who have fallen in Heath's rankings. So you might want to make that qualification, especially with Pickens, because I know you still like where he's going.
Yeah, like as we said, like as the headline says, Heath's preseason fallers. These guys rank lower in my rankings than they did before the preseason, and that's mostly just because I was forced to watch the Steelers play in the preseason, and their offensive line was abysmal. They're going to be starting 2 rookies. I'm not sure either one of their tackles can block. The reason they have to play Darnell Washington so much is because they're not blocking anybody with their regular offensive linemen. They're going to need 6 offensive linemen on the field at all times to prevent any type of pass rush. Pat Freiermuth is not playing a starter share of the snaps with the starters. It's a complete rotation at tight end, which we've seen from Arthur Smith before. Jaylen Warren, who I do still kind of like, suffered the hamstring injury. It seems like Najee's going to be the lead back and Warren's going to be the 1B, and he's not enough of a discount for me to draft him there. I still, like you said, Adam, George Pickens is going end of round 5, early round 6. As long as Brandon Aiyuk does not become a Steeler, that's going to be a steal of a draft pick. But I had George Pickens ranked as a top 15, top 18 wide receiver. He's just outside of my top 20 now.
This one's going to be a lot harder for me to play devil's advocate on because I'm right there with Heath. I think a lot of the times when it comes to offensive line play, we look at things like they've collected a lot of talent on the Steelers offensive line, a lot of heavy investment draft picks. But guess who since 2020 has invested more in the offensive line than any team in the NFL per draft capital? It's the New York Giants, and that's still one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL. A lot of the offensive line play comes down to continuity and coaching and how are these players playing. And right now, they do not look ready, the Steelers offensive line that is, to enter week 1 and be a team that can move the football consistently with Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. So it's very hard for me to then buy into any players on that offense. And I'm with Heath on this one. I've moved all of them down my rankings slightly.
Christian Kirk, is there a reason other than the injury that you have moved Christian Kirk down?
I mean, I didn't like the fact that he wasn't playing in 2 wide receiver sets. I'm not entirely sure that that's going to matter. It might be that they try it for a couple of weeks like they did last year, and they're like, nope, we've got to play him. But even last year, he was like a 70-75% guy. I've been impressed with Brian Thomas. I thought Thomas, like we didn't talk about him too much on the risers, I thought he was a guy that might need most of the first half before he starts getting really involved. And it seems like the last couple of weeks of training camp or of the preseason, he's really at least impressed the coaches and impressed the guys who are watching practice. So I've got a little bigger role projected for him.
Dan, where you at on Kirk?
I'm in the same boat as Heath. I didn't like that he wasn't playing those rooster sets, but I didn't want to make too much of it. But other things that there are other factors in play here. Evan Ingram has looked phenomenal this preseason, is a big part of this offense. Brian Thomas has looked phenomenal, is at this point pushing toward at least some role in the regular season. So there are a lot of different players there. Doug Peterson has never been shy about using 12 personnel and getting 2 tight ends on the field. And if we're looking at like a 60% snap share with Christian Kirk, we're still just basically banking on what he did 2 years ago with an entirely different cast around him.
Okay, I think he'll play more than 60% of the snaps. And yeah, last year they tried to take him off the field in week 1 with in their 2 receiver sets, and then they were like, nope. So that was a 1-week Zay Jones experiment. Brian Thomas, obviously, but they had Calvin Ridley last year too. I don't know. I think maybe this is one where I'm buying the dip, as we say a lot, but fair enough. So if Dan didn't debate enough with Heath there, and he was very respectful, like every time, oh, please, Heath, don't get mad at me. I don't want to debate. Next segment, we are forcing him. He had to pick 5 of Heath's rankings to dispute. So up next on Fantasy Football Today, we are going to talk about Malik Nabers and 4 other guys right after this. It is time for some rankings disputes on Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. Friendships will be tested, especially when we get to our 5th and final rankings dispute. Let's start with Derrick Henry. So we asked Dan to take a look at Heath's rankings and come up with 5 rankings that he wanted to argue about. So Derrick Henry is the first one. He's RB16 for Heath in PPR. And Dan, what is that? Too high, too low? What do you think?
I have too low on this one. I understand ranking him lower for a PPR league for certain, but I have trouble getting to the point of 15 running backs who I think have a higher upside for touchdowns or anywhere near the amount of touchdowns that Derrick Henry will score this season. And ultimately, for me, fantasy is a game of touchdowns and touches, and those are the 2 things to be chasing. And ultimately, I think the Ravens will also alter their offense a little bit with Henry on the roster. I think we're going to be seeing some games where the Ravens are up 1, 2, maybe 3 scores in the second half, and they lean on Henry to ice the game and to close out the game. And we'll be looking at games where he's scoring 16, 17 points, maybe 18, a touchdown and 100 total yards, or touchdown and 80 or 90. No receptions, again, which is going to drag it down to some extent. But even with factoring in the receptions, I find it hard to find 5, 6 backs ahead of him in Heath's rankings who are going to get to that average score per game. And he's not going to score every week, Henry, but I think it's possible he could get close to 17 touchdowns this year.
I will say that Gus Edwards finished 3rd in the NFL in rushing touchdowns last year and finished somewhere around RB 40. Derrick Henry, though,
without a lot of rushing yards.
Right, without a lot of rushing yards. And I think that's the problem. Like last year, Derrick Henry was RB 16 with 12 rushing touchdowns, which ranked 4th or 5th, 11, I'm sorry. Didn't really catch the ball, led the NFL in rush attempts. There is 0 chance that a running back playing with Lamar Jackson is going to lead the NFL in rush attempts because Jackson handles 30% of the Ravens' rush attempts. And I think that one thing Dan said, because like Jamie's mentioned also a lot of times how much better he was in wins than he was in losses. I do think like if they're winning games by 7 to 14 points, that's going to be really great for Derrick Henry. If they're up 3 scores, it's not going to be Derrick Henry. This is a team that thinks they're competing for a Super Bowl. He's a 30-year-old running back. You can't give him 25 touches per game, and they keep saying, we want Justice Hill to touch the ball some too. Justice Hill is going to be on the field. They've always been a 2-back team, and it's really more of a 3-back system because Lamar Jackson's there. Don't bet on a 30-year-old running back being better than he was last year, especially when he changed teams.
One pushback on that would be just that the efficiency hasn't come down for Henry at all.
He averaged a career low in yards per carry and yards per touch last year.
And yards per carry, sure, and yards per touch, but these are not the efficiency marks I'm talking about. I'm talking about advanced statistics here. Those are raw numbers that can be, in my mind, dependent on the offensive line and factors within the offense game script. But as far as just like forced missed tackle rate and yards after contact per attempt, not much of a drop off there. So I'm betting on better offensive line, better offensive environment. But I understand his point because there is the opportunity that the offensive environment is too good and the situation is too good that they might want to keep him, in a limited role, 15, 16 touches a game, even when the game script is good. And that's when things get risky. But I do feel like he won't need to lead the league in rushing attempts, like you said last year, because he'll be so much more efficient on the attempts he does get.
By the way, Heath, when you said the Ravens were, they think they're Super Bowl contenders, was that like an LOL? They're not really. Like they can't get past
they believe that they are Super Bowl contenders. I believe that they. Well, if they were in the NFC, they would be Super Bowl contenders.
All right, Michael Pittman is up next. Derrick Henry was running back 16 in PPR. Michael Pittman is wide receiver 16 in PPR. What's your beef here, Dan?
I have Michael Pittman a lot lower, even in PPR leagues, full PPR leagues. I look at this offense and I just don't see how he. So last season, Michael Pittman ended up being a great buy. And a lot of that I felt like was because Gardner Minshew came in and Anthony Richardson got hurt. I watched how that offense ran, ton of RPO, and basically just utilized Pittman. And at the same time, Gardner just kept leaning on him in the passing game. I have reservations about A, Richardson keeping the passing game as on schedule. B, Richardson relying as much on the passing game, so I think pass attempts will come down. C, pass attempts in the red zone coming way down. Pittman's already not a big touchdown scorer. I could see that number dipping really low this year into the 5-6 range total for Michael Pittman. So if we're only in the 5-6 touchdown range, the targets are coming down, the passing attempts for the offense are coming down, it's hard for me to believe that I could take him anywhere near this. I have him ranked a lot lower than consensus in general. He's much lower. He's in the, I think he's wide receiver 26 for me. So just not a player I'm betting on this year.
Michael Pittman finished as wide receiver 16 last year with 4 receiving touchdowns. So I think 5 or 6 touchdowns, like if he does that, he's actually improving on last year. This was a team that threw for 3,800 yards and 18 passing touchdowns. I just don't really believe, as much as I love Gardner Minshew, I don't believe Anthony Richardson's going to be a significant downgrade as a passer. And it didn't look like, in the very limited sample that we saw last year, like one of the things I was worried about, does he gets into trouble in the pocket, does he just take off and run every time? He didn't do that. He processed very well. He got the ball out of his hand. He did not take sacks, and he didn't take off and scramble at an insane rate like we see some young running quarterbacks do. So I do think there's some risk they score more touchdowns on the ground than they do through the air. I actually expect for Pittman's efficiency to improve with Richardson at quarterback. I think his threat as a rusher is going to make it more difficult for teams to dedicate too much at stopping Pittman. And I don't think Josh Downs or A.D. Mitchell is actually going to cut into his target share.
Well, we get to talk more about Gardner Minshew because let's go to Davante Adams, the third on our ranking list. Davante Adams is wide receiver 25 in PPR. Dan, what's your argument here?
I'm not even huge on Davante Adams this year, but wide receiver 25 for me is a little too low. I just think that if we're looking at this kind of like just those two back-to-back, Pittman wide receiver 16, Adams wide receiver 25, I'm not so sure I can really get on board with that because I think Adams is just as likely, if not likelier, to get as many, if not more targets than Pittman. He's proven to be a much better touchdown scorer in his career and will continue to be so because I personally don't think Anthony Richardson is throwing for too many passing touchdowns this year. Not that I think Minshew is either, but Minshew is the guy who just made Pittman a volume-based play. Like, Heath, you talked about Pittman, you made great points, but part of it was the targets, right? Like, Pittman was wild from a target standpoint last year, not just target share, but pure volume. And you think that will stay the same even with A.D. Mitchell and Downs in there. I disagree on that, but that's fine. But Adams should be right in play with that, with more touchdown upside and the chance for, look, if he gets traded in week 6 at the deadline, we could be looking at a player that has a totally different outlook for the rest of the season if he gets that quarterback upgrade, which might happen or might not happen. Obviously, it's speculation at that point, but I just don't see the drop-off difference there. I'd rather bet on the player I think looks better on tape, and that's Adams, even at this age and this stage of his career, and from a quarterback who I think is going to be a little bit more accurate and give him a little bit more of a chance to score touchdowns.
Yeah, I've got pretty much a rule with wide receivers 29 or 30 years older or older, and it's like when you see a dip in efficiency, believe it. And we saw a pretty big, and it may have been entirely quarterback-based last year, we saw a pretty big dip in efficiency for Davante Adams. The touchdown rate was below 5% for the first time in a long time. The yards per target, yards per catch were way down. I do think I actually have Davante Adams projected for more targets. I just don't think we're going, like last year it was Pittman at wide receiver 16, Adams at wide receiver 17. I think the addition of Brock Bowers matters more than the addition of A.D. Mitchell. I expect Jacoby Myers to make at least as big a dent in the target share as a Josh Downs does. And I just think that there's the added risk with Adams that some of that efficiency decrease that we saw last year is a sign of him starting to fall off.
I think your argument about receivers at that age, it reminds me of like betting on a middle-aged tennis player who just double faulted 9 times the last time he played. Like no one in their right mind would make that bet. So let's go to another older wide receiver who showed some slippage last year, Stefon Diggs. Heath has him as wide receiver 31 in PPR. Mr. Double Fault, what fault do you find with this ranking?
This one's also a little bit too low for me. I think he's 4 spots below Tank Dell in Heath's rankings. And for me, it just comes down to this. Bobby Slowick is not going to reinvent the wheel entirely. Will he use more 11 personnel this year? Yes, but it's not going to be a situation where he's running this pure 11 personnel, spread it out offense. He comes from the Shanahan coaching tree. Their whole offense is predicated on the run game and the run scheme. So they're still going to run 12. And when that happens, what are we going to see? What do you think we're going to see? Stefon Diggs, who just got traded there and has a history of not always being, happy with his role, being okay coming off the field in new sets, or Tank Dell coming off the field as the second-year guy, former, mid-round pick. I think we're going to see Tank Dell come off the field in these sets. So that just means a lot more snaps for Stefon Diggs in this offense, and a lot more routes, and that's what I'll bank on for this. I like Dell better at this stage of their careers as a talent, and if I was sure that they were going to play a ton of 11 personnel and lead the league in 11, I'd be fine with it. That's just not what I envision this offense looking like.
Yeah, I just think we're going to see that Tank Dell on a per route, per target basis much more efficient than Stefon Diggs. And I wouldn't be surprised if we get to a point in the middle of the season where the Texans have to make a choice between keeping their franchise quarterback happy and keeping the old wide receiver they just traded for happy. Because C.J. Stroud loves Tank Dell, wants Tank Dell on the field. They will also use him as a rusher. I think the problem, and I'm lower on Nico than consensus as well, the problem these guys have is that when they're all healthy, there's not enough targets for all of them to deliver on their ADP. I like betting on Nico and Tank Dell better because they can make those big plays and score fantasy points in a hurry. I think with what we've seen with Diggs, like he's used to a 9 to 10 target per game type of pace. He has no chance of that in Houston. He's going to have to reinvent himself and start producing at an elite level on a per target basis, or he's just going to be dust for fantasy football purposes.
All right, let's get to the main event. I think Dave and Jamie have Malik Nabers as wide receiver 18 in their PPR rankings. Double it. He is wide receiver 36 for Heath. This is way too low, right, Dan?
It's way too low for me. Look, when it comes to Malik Nabers, he's checked every single box you could ask him to check so far this preseason. The target share has been unbelievable in the preseason game he's played. The air yardage share has been unbelievable in the preseason game. The joint practices, he lit it up. The regular practices, he lit it up. He is, in a lot of people's minds, some people felt, not a lot, I should say, a small percentage of people felt he was a better prospect than Harrison because he offered something different than Marvin Harrison. But either way, those two are two of the best prospects we've seen at the wide receiver position in the last 10 years. Only thing that's holding him back, I think he's got the targets. I think he's got the coach who understands he has to design the offense around him. The talent, he can win deep, he can win intermediate, he can win short. They've already given him an end around in the preseason, so he's going to be used as a rusher too. The only thing holding him back is the quarterback situation, which is horrific, and we all know that. But at the same time, when it comes to what I think he's going to get, which is 150 targets in year one, something Odell Beckham Jr. got right away. It wasn't 150 because he missed the first 4 games, but on a per game basis, he was averaging to be over 150. It doesn't matter what happens with the quarterback. When you get 150 targets, you're going to be better than wide receiver 38, I think, because the guys that are ahead of him are just not getting that kind of target share. And if they are, they have nowhere near the kind of talent that he has, but they're not going to get those targets either. So I think he's explosive enough. I think it's basically what I said before, and I'll say again. It's going to be a repeat of Jaylen Waddle's rookie season. It's a Mickey Mouse offense. There's a lot of manufactured targets, but the receptions will be high, the yards will be high, and the touchdowns will be low. Yeah,
and I just think we have a history recently that shows us it does matter. I've seen this all over social media. You don't discount Malik Nabers because of his quarterback. He's so good, his quarterback doesn't matter. Garrett Wilson saw 168 targets last year and finished as wide receiver 35. Drake London saw a 29% target share as a rookie and finished outside of the top 40 wide receivers. Last year, DeAndre Hopkins was top 10 in both target share and air yard share and finished as wide receiver 30. What did those guys have in common? Terrible quarterback play. We know Malik Nabers is going to have terrible quarterback play. The New York Giants did not throw a touchdown pass in the preseason. Now, it's the preseason. It doesn't really matter, except we've got a 3-year history of the New York Giants being in the teens in passing touchdowns. It's just a terrible offensive environment. I love Malik Nabers. He is a top 9 dynasty wide receiver for me. I just reached for him in a draft because I didn't want to go through the entire preseason with no Malik Nabers. But I cannot fathom drafting him as a top 20 wide receiver. What you need is what Dan said. You need a 28, 29% target share, 150 targets, and then maybe he pays off at cost. There's no upside at where people are drafting him right now with Daniel Jones as his quarterback.
All right. Well,
I
I'll just wrap
understand
it. I got to
Yeah, go
wrap it
ahead.
up, Dan, for break here, but I will say that the team you drafted with Malik Nabers, it is the best team you've drafted so far. So you can keep doing it. Let's talk about some of the best combos in fantasy football when we come back on Fantasy Football Today. And welcome back, everybody, to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. I'm Adam Azer with Dan Schneier and Heath Cummings. Dan and Heath, what a great combo. And now you guys are going to tell me which fantasy combo you like better. Heath, you'll get the first word, Dan the last word on each of these. Let's start with different ways to build your draft. This is based on ADP, most of this. Breece Hall and Davante Adams, or Tyreek Hill and Devon Achane. Which combo do you like better, Heath?
So I don't think I've drafted a lot of Adams or Achane, but I will say the gap in my projections between Tyreek Hill and Davante Adams is 150 points. I only have 100 points separating Hall and Achane, so I will go with Tyreek and Achane.
I'm also going to go with Tyreek and Achane, despite the fact that I have Breece Hall as my second overall player in fantasy right now, just behind Christian McCaffrey. I would draft the number 2 overall if I had that pick right now. Hill would be 4, though, and I have Achane ranked considerably higher than Davante Adams. It's a bet I'd much rather make, so they get the nod.
Let's do a quarterback tight end combo. Travis Kelce and CJ Stroud, or Patrick Mahomes and Dalton Kincaid.
I will go with Mahomes and Kincaid. Mahomes is my highest ranked player out of the group.
Yeah, I'm also going with Mahomes and Kincaid. I think ultimately I've been talked into this idea that Travis Kelce is not going to be used as much toward the end of the season with the Chiefs heading into the playoffs. And I hope that ends up being the case, because I think we could all be really wrong on Kelce. He could be back to returning borderline first round, second round value this year. We'll see. But I really think that's within the realm of possibilities, in which case this would be a bad pick. But I have Mahomes as my QB1 overall this year. I think he's going to throw for like 5,040 with this team around him. So I got to go with that group.
All right, Amon-Ra St. Brown and Travis Etienne. That's one way to build your first 2 picks there. Or Jonathan Taylor and Puka Nacua. Heath, which one do you like better?
This is probably the closest one for me, but Amon-Ra St. Brown's actually my number 3 wide receiver, and if CeeDee Lamb doesn't show up pretty quick, he might be my number 2 wide receiver. The gap between him and Puka just a little bigger for me than the gap between Taylor and Etienne, so I will take the top one, ARSB and Etienne.
It's an interesting one. I'm going to go with ARSB and Etienne as well. I know we're not getting many misses here, Adam, but that's just how it goes. I got to give the best pick, not just pick different, just to pick different. And you're giving him first word on every single one of these. So I don't know what you expect out of me, Adam, Mr. Laughing over there. But
you get the first word on the next one. You ready? Here we go.
Okay, then maybe I'll get the chance. But, as far as the question goes, I'm just not investing. I'm not investing in Puka.
Let's just go right to the next one. Ready?
All right.
Because we're going to run out of time. So I'm going to give you 49ers or Falcons. Would you rather have Kittle and Deebo Samuel, or London and Pitts, Dan?
That's a very fun one, and I'll go with London and Pitts. I'm buying into Kirk Cousins-led offense, and I'm buying into how easy the Falcons' schedule is for passing.
I still have the possibility that Brandon Aiyuk's going to be a Pittsburgh Steeler, so I will absolutely take George Kittle and Deebo Samuel, who might both be second-round picks if Aiyuk goes away.
Okay, and obviously Dan would have said that if he had gone second. So
No shot.
All right, Dan, it's a tough one. I'll let you go first on this one. Would you rather have, what's a better combo? Peanut butter and jelly, or macaroni and cheese?
Peanut butter and jelly.
Oh, we got 2 food combos here. Like, we have peanut butter and jelly and mac and cheese, and then we have fries and ketchup or chips and guac.
Fries and ketchup and PB&J. That's my mix.
So I'm not going to put these things together, but I will have a PB&J, and I will have chips and guac for sure. Ketchup over guac, Dan? Come on.
No, it's the fries. The fries are so much better than chips.
But honestly, what's wrong with a little PB&J with some fries and ketchup? That's a good combo.
Nothing. I would eat that. I might eat that today.
Yeah.
Yeah, keep it up, and I get a little advantage there for the match tomorrow. All right, go back to football. Heath, you can go first here. We'll see if we'll test my theory. Garrett Wilson and Marvin Harrison. You go wide receiver, Garrett Wilson and Marvin Harrison, or running back, Gibbs and Kyron Williams. Would you rather have Garrett and Harrison or Gibbs and Kyron?
So you did a good job with this one, because I would rank these for Garrett, Kyron, Gibbs, Harrison. I'm going to go with the wide receiver there. We're talking, it says PPR leagues. We're talking a full PPR draft. So I think there's a very small chance, but there's a chance like you're drafting 2 of the top 3 wide receivers in fantasy this year.
This feels like a setup question. Obviously, Adam, you know me. You know I would never go with running back over wide receiver in PPR. Not to mention I have Garrett Wilson ranked as my clear-cut highest player of all these guys. So obviously it's Wilson and Harrison for me.
All right, we're going to take a break. We're going to get some chips and guac or fries and ketchup, whatever it is, and come back with your fill in the blanks after this on Fantasy Football Today. Finishing up with your tweets and fill in the blank on Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. This one from Josh. Blank is the player I am scared to be the most wrong about, Heath.
It's got to be Malik Nabers. I'm going to get blasted by both of you guys if I am.
That's a good one. I like that call. Let me go with, let's see. Here's a player I'm most scared to be wrong. I'm going to say Kyren Williams because I haven't drafted a lot of Kyren, and I could totally see a scenario that plays out similar to last year with that duo running so well up front. They added Jonah Jackson to that line, and he just racks up 13, 14 touchdowns and a ton of yards.
I'm going to say Sam Laporta. I haven't drafted him yet, but he scored all of his touchdowns indoors last year, and they play almost exclusively indoors, so he could have a big year. All right, our tweet is from Giggity. CeeDee Lamb will sign on blank and be wide receiver blank.
I do not have I mean, I'm getting scared to death, but I will say he will sign on Wednesday and be wide receiver 1.
I'll say sign on Friday. Yeah, I'm going to have optimism too. Sign on Friday and be wide receiver 2 just because it's very rare that the wide receiver 1 repeats.
He will sign on paper and be wide receiver 3. Our next fill in the blank. Well, thank you, Dan. Thank you. Morgan King. Blank is a must-own sleeper running back to take with your last pick.
So, like, he's probably not going to sign on paper, right? It's probably one of those DocuSign situations where he just signs the thing on the computer. I think you already missed that bold prediction. Like, the last pick part throwing me off here just a little bit, but I will still say Jaylen Wright. He's looks like the RB4 in Miami right now. I don't believe that will be the case by week 8.
In not so deep leagues, Tank Bigsby is my pick. Love how he's looked this preseason. I think we can just carry over what we said last year and hope that it will come back this year. Now it's a last round pick instead of where it was last year, which is went all the way up to 10, 11. But I'm going to go Carson Steele if you're in a deep league.
Oh, wow. All right, I'll take Jaleel McLaughlin and or Khalil Herbert. Got a couple of tweets left here. This one is from Ty Langston. Name is going to be Tylen there, but I avoided that mistake. Blank is this year's Raheem Mostert, running back we have written off who could go for 20 touchdowns.
Much like there is no Puka Nacua, there is also not going to be a Raheem Mostert. But if I had to pick one, it'd be James Conner.
I was going to say James Conner, too. That was my only guy I had. He was the best fit for this, without a doubt. But let me say this. If Jaylen Warren re-aggravates his hamstring injury, give me Najee Harris for this.
And I think this year's Raheem Mostert is most likely going to be Raheem Mostert. We have sort of
I like that.
Let him do it again. All right, one more here from Keep Pounding. If Kyle Pitts hits his potential that he was drafted for, he will be a round blank pick in 2025. Go real quick, guys.
It will be a round 2 pick in 2025 because he will be tight end 1 this year.
Yeah, he nailed that. His potential he was drafted for in the NFL. I don't know if he still has that in him. Hopefully he does, but that would be easy. Borderline round 1, round 2 pick.
Yeah, I'll say that. And look, if he doesn't hit this year, next year will be the year for Kyle Pitts, okay? Just keep drafting with a mid-round pick. It will happen eventually. That is it for Fantasy Football Today here on CBS Sports Network. You can catch actually another episode right here tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show, check out the Fantasy Football Today podcast. We're going to have 7 episodes per week during the season to help you win your league. For Heath Cummings and Dan Schneier, I'm Adam Azer. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, everyone.